Good evening and welcome to the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada's first public meeting for proposed transit service changes. I'm Sue with Outreach and Media for the RTC. Before we begin tonight's formal presentation, I would like to review a few housekeeping items to help this go as smoothly as possible. To allow for public participation, the RTC is accepting public comments via email at getconnected@rtcsnv.com. Comments can be submitted to be read aloud or to be added directly to the written record. Additionally, comments or questions specifically concerning the proposed service changes may be submitted on the comments section of the YouTube live stream of this meeting. We will provide several breaks in the presentation to address questions as we go, and we will hold a final question and answer session at the conclusion of the presentation. If we happen to have additional questions beyond the 2-hour meeting time, we will provide answers via email, and all questions and answers from this online session will be posted on rtcsnv.com by early next week. I will now turn the time over to Francis Julian, Deputy CEO of the RTC.
Good evening. As we all know and have experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the global economy, our transportation infrastructure system, and has changed life as we know it. At the RTC, similar to other agencies, we have taken several actions to mitigate the financial impacts of COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19, our transit service was already facing significant financial strain. Our previous revenue and expense projections showed a $6 million shortfall in our transit fund for FY 2020 that just ended last June. And future year projections show the shortfall could be as high as $20 million per year. With the impact of severe revenue decline due to COVID-19, the RTC Transit Fund is estimated to have a $24 million shortfall for FY 2020 that just ended last month, and a $102 million shortfall for FY 2021, which we're currently in. To adjust for the budget deficit, internally, we cut nearly $40 million from our budget. How did we do this? We eliminated and postponed some capital projects. We suspended and cut some of our contracts. We have a hiring freeze at the agency. Management pay was cut up to 5%. We just concluded negotiating with our collective bargaining agreement staff, and they're all having salary cuts. We laid off or furloughed nearly 15% of our workforce, and what we're here for tonight, we're proposing significant reduction to our transit services. While all transit agencies throughout North America are facing financial challenges due to COVID-19, the RTC is in a very unique position because of two reasons. Our system is primarily funded by fare revenues and sales tax revenue. Other transit agencies across the country fund their transit services from multiple funding sources to include not only sales tax and fares, but also property tax, fuel tax, and TNC, Transport Networking Company tax. Second, prior to the pandemic, we were already, as I was saying, facing a transit funding shortfall, and as a community, whole economy relies primarily on the tourism industry. How and when we recover may look different from our peers. Thanks to the CARES Act, which is a Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the RTC will receive $112 million in federal funds. We actually plan to use the first $24 million to gap our financial constraints from FY 2020. Next, we'll actually use those funds to help us with the deficit for the current fiscal year we're in, 2021, and finally use the last $24 million for FY 2022. As you can see, that still leaves a big deficit for 2022, 2023, and 2024. Long-term funding for transit services will continue to be a serious challenge that we are going to have to address by FY 2022. Again, we are already proposing significant cuts to our transit services for this fall and may need to make additional adjustments in the future. What are we proposing? We're actually proposing three buckets of changes that we will do. First of all, there will be route elimination. Then we'll have proposed adjustments to existing routes and proposed frequency decrease on one particular route. I'll turn it back over to Sue to review the outreach and engagement for those proposed changes.
All right, thank you, Francis. So before we make any final decisions on the proposed changes, we need to hear from our community. We began an open comment period at the end of June, June 29th, and that will run through the end of August, on August 28th. So part of that comment period includes this meeting tonight, so it's really important that you are here with us tonight. We're asking individuals to visit rtcsnv.com and review the detailed changes and provide feedback via a brief survey. And of course, tonight, while you're here, feel free to provide your comments and ask questions. To date, we've received more than 3,000 responses on the survey, so we're really excited about that, and we appreciate your involvement. So the objectives of the outreach are threefold. One, to educate our community, to share with everyone what it is that we're proposing to change. The second is to listen. Again, that's why we're here tonight. That's why we're having a 60-day comment period, is to gather feedback and hear from our community. And then finally, to learn and analyze that data and the feedback that we get back and make possible adjustments if we can. So our goal of that outreach also is to reach out to every customer that we have in our transit system and also non-transit riders, anyone who might be interested in what's happening in transit here in Las Vegas. And we hope to hear from at least 1 in 4 of those people. 25% of that community that hears from us, we want to hear back. So that really is our goal of this outreach. So system-wide, we know that there are certain routes that Francis mentioned that are highly impacted by the changes, but we want to reach out to the whole system. So the first thing that we've done and we've been very active with is our elected official briefings and outreach. We've met with your local leaders. They've been very helpful in sharing information with their constituents across the valley. Second, we've had some in-person community engagement, a little bit of that, especially during the COVID times right now, staying socially distant from each other, but we have gone out to some of our transit centers and met with some of you there. And third, we've reached out and used our media. Our media has been super helpful as well. They've pushed out information, they've shared the public meetings, and have helped us get the information out. And fourth, our marketing efforts. We have information on our vehicles, at our transit centers, transit Wi-Fi in our vehicles and at our facilities. And we've pushed out emails, social media. It's on our website, rider alerts, all kinds of information. So hopefully that is how you made it to us tonight. Looking specifically at those routes that are highly impacted, we've done some additional efforts, including targeted community engagement. So we're working in senior facilities, looking at high traffic areas along those specific routes. We've done some targeted social media advertising, focusing again on these highly impacted routes, and then targeted marketing, including mailers, door hangers, flyers to businesses along the route. So hopefully, again, you saw something somewhere that invited you here tonight. We appreciate you being here. I'm going to turn the time back over to Francis, and he'll go through the details of the changes.
Thank you, Sue. As I was mentioning before, there's 3 areas of proposed changes that we'll review with you in detail tonight. First, those routes proposed for elimination. Second, those routes proposed for routing adjustment. And lastly, the one route that is proposed for a frequency decrease. So the route that we're proposing for elimination is the 207, the 209, the SDX, and the WAX. Let's start with the 207. The route, it will be completely discontinued, but it will be replaced with a Silver Star route that runs 3 to 4 days a week. Silver Star routes are actually servicing some of the most vital points of that route, apartment complex, grocery stores, and medical buildings. The RTC, the reasoning behind the discontinuing of that route is the RTC primarily operates bus routes on major streets that are 1 mile apart throughout much of the valley in Las Vegas. Route 207 is an exception, running entirely on streets that are half a mile from larger, busier streets and transit services like Charleston and Bonanza. Alternative routes are available nearby for a vast majority of our customers. 98.8% of residents and 99.8% of jobs within 1 mile, half a mile of Route 207 are also within half a mile of other routes. The top 20 busiest stops along the route all have other bus routes available at the same intersection or within a quarter mile or less. The second route that we're proposing to discontinue is the Route 209, the Vegas and Owens route. It will actually also be replaced with the same Silver Star route running 3 to 4 days a week. Once again, we usually only operate routes that are on major streets that are 1 mile apart throughout the valley. Route 209 is also an exception, running entirely on streets that are half a mile from larger, busier streets and transit services, notably Lake Mead Boulevard and Washington Avenue. And once again, there's alternative routes to our customer. 99.6% of residents and 99.9% of jobs within half a mile of Route 209 are also half a mile from other routes. The 20 busiest stops along the route all have other bus routes available at the same intersection or within a quarter mile or less, or 5-minute walks. The third elimination is the Strip and Downtown Express on the Strip. The SDX and Deuce routes are a combination of one route elimination and routing adjustment. So we're not proposing to eliminate the Deuce at all. So discontinuing the SDX and the Downtown Express, we also will be increasing the Deuce service to 24 hours and increase frequency on the route. Ridership on the SDX has declined by 1/3 over the past 4 years, and decrease are likely to accelerate further in the post-COVID-19 new normal. The SDX is redundant. Almost all stops serving 97% of the SDX customers will be served by the Deuce or another route. The SDX fuel inefficient vehicles are higher and higher fare evasion, since it's an all-door boarding route, makes it the RTC's most expensive route per bus per hour to operate. Relocating main public transit stop for the Las Vegas Convention Center to the Las Vegas Boulevard aligns well with the Convention Center expansion and the new underground people mover system, while allowing transit to remain directly on Las Vegas Boulevard. We will also be introducing a downtown shuttle to connect the Las Vegas Premium Outlet to the Deuce. Finally, the last route elimination that we're proposing is the WAX, but this is actually a combination of what the WAX and the CX were. These are going to be noteworthy changes to the Centennial Express, the CX, and the Westcliff Airport Express, the WAX, that will not affect or reduce the paratransit service area, but may include eliminating the WAX, modifying the Centennial Express, the CX, replace a lower ridership path for the CX between downtown Las Vegas and UNLV with a higher ridership routing used by the Westcliff Airport Express in this area, creating a new, more efficient CX that serves the most popular destination on both routes. CX would no longer serve Spring Mountain at the Las Vegas Boulevard, Howard Hughes Parkway, or Flamingo in Maryland, but instead would now serve Tropicana at Las Vegas Boulevard and McCarran Airport Terminal 1, in addition to the current Terminal 3 services. Express services to and from Centennial Hill and downtown Las Vegas, UNLV, and McCarran Airport will not be affected. Monica, are there any questions from our YouTube or email?
Not at this time.
Okay, thanks. I'll continue. So next, the proposed changes are for routing adjustments. The first routing adjustment is Route 104. Route 104 is the Valley View and Arville route. With Route 104 specifically, modifications are being proposed to the route on Valley View between Russell and Twain. Route 104 is primarily intended, and it was always intended, to serve Valley View, but it always operated along Arville from Russell to Twain because Valley View did not connect between Flamingo and Tropicana. A major new bridge over the railroad tracks is opening this summer that will change that. So the RTC is proposing for Route 104 to remain on Valley View between Russell and Twain. This will eliminate the need to deviate to Arville and make a more natural path to that route. The HDX, the Henderson Downtown Express. The HDX will be shortened to run only between Water Street and Boulder City. It will no longer run to the downtown Las Vegas. The route will stay on I-11 bypass Nevada State College, and Nevada State College will be serviced by the Boulder Highway Express. The Sahara Express. Restructure and shorten the Sahara Express A and B lines. Modifications are being proposed to the route on the east side of the valley, specifically east of Sarah and Lamb, where the SX branches is off. The SXA service along Nellis and Lake Mead would be eliminated. The SXA would instead stay on Sahara and go to Hollywood, and it would end at Hollywood and Vegas Valley. It's worth noting that the part of the route that would be eliminated would be serviced by other routes. The SXB would be slightly shorter, ending at Cabana and Desert Inn. Monica, any questions on these routes?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. And finally, I'll be talking about one route frequency decrease. The Maryland Parkway and Horizon Ridge in Henderson. The route frequency will be reduced from every 30 minutes during weekdays to every 50 minutes. 60 minutes weekend frequency will remain the same as it is right now. We have 3 more public meetings after tonight where the community can engage with us virtually on YouTube Live or in person at our Bonneville Transit Center. For our virtual public meeting, participants can go to the RTC YouTube page and submit comments and questions on Wednesday, July 29 from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. For our in-person public meeting, we will hold them at the BTC in the morning and early evening on Wednesday, August 5th. In the morning, there will be from 7 to 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and in the afternoon from 5 to 7 p.m. What is our timeline for those changes? So June 29th to August 28th, we actually are doing 60 days of public outreach, which we're doing now. All the digital engagement, social media, PR, and in-person engagement launch first day of the comment period. September 10, we will actually go seek approval from the RTC board, and potentially those changes would be implemented on October 4, 2020 for the service change to start. This concludes my presentation, and we are all available here at the RTC to take any question you may have. Monica, are there any more questions?
We do have a couple of questions from YouTube. The very first one is more generic, asking, will any bus passes increase or decrease in terms of cost?
Not at the moment.
The second question is a specific question for Route 209. And the question is, I catch the 209 bus to work on Asteroid, and that's the bus I catch on Owens up to Asterisk. That's the correction of the street. How would I get to work and how would I get home?
Okay, I'll defer to our transit signer, Jacob Simmons, who is on the line with us. Jacob.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. So if I'm recalling my cross streets correctly, this would be in the area of Vegas Drive between Durango and Cimarron. In that area, it would depend on the customer's final destination that they are trying to get to for work. but in that area, the nearest service at that point would become the 208 route on Washington, which is about a half mile from Vegas Drive at that point, either walking down Durango or down Cimarron to Washington Avenue.
Thank you, Jacob.
Great, thank you, Jacob. We do have one more question that is route specific. For schedule change Route 122, I thought all the buses were currently running on weekend schedule. Is the plan to increase the schedule from 1 hour to 15 minutes?
So that would be the change that a person would see on October 4th if we are to go to weekday schedule, when we will go to weekday schedule. There's still a chance we might be running Saturday schedule, but eventually we would actually go from the 60 minutes to the 50-minute frequency.
I do not see any additional questions.
Okay. We could wait a bit in case we have more questions.
He is wondering, is there going to be any service to the Sunset Station?
Jacob Simmons, would you?
Yes, absolutely. The only changes that are being proposed that would affect transit service in the area of Sunset Station would be the partial elimination of the HDX, the removal of the HDX from that area. The Sunset Station would continue being served by routes 115, Nellis Stephanie, 212 Sunset, and 217 on Warm Springs. Route 115 being the most frequent of those.
Thank you, Jacob.
Thanks, Jacob. Another question that's specific to a route. Will the HDX still be running to downtown Las Vegas?
No, it will not. As we stated, the SDX will stop in Henderson, so passengers will have to transfer on the Boulder Highway Express.
Thank you. One more question. Are there any plans to increase shade shelters to allow for increased social distancing while waiting for the bus?
So we do have some replacement in line. Obviously, I don't have the details on specific route installation, but what we've decided is to keep some of the older shelters, to keep some of that shelter, and just add new shelters throughout the valley. Hope that answers the question.
Another question, and I think you briefly touched on it, Francis, but just in general, for all routes, are all buses going to be on a 15-minute frequency?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? I missed that.
Are all the buses going to be on a 15-minute frequency?
For which route?
For all routes.
Oh, no. Each routes are keeping their regular frequency, except the route 122 that we just talked about. But all bus routes will maintain the same frequency that is in the transit guide, obviously on Saturday's schedule until we're running Saturday's schedule, and when we'll be back to weekday schedule, you can actually refer to the transit guide, and we'll keep the same frequency. So some of our routes are actually as frequent as 15 minutes.
Thank you. One more question from Dawn as well. Tropicana to Sunset Station, since the wax is being eliminated, how would I get there?
Jacob Simmons. Jacob?
Monica, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. The question asks, from Tropicana to Sunset Station, since the wax is being eliminated, how would I get there?
Trying to interpret the question because the wax doesn't currently serve Sunset Station.
Not exactly.
Perhaps the question is about the HDX serving Sunset Station. In either case, with Route 115 traveling north and south throughout most of the valley, customers would be able to reach Sunset Station from any east-west route by then transferring to such as Flamingo, Tropicana, Charleston, etc., and then transferring to Route 115 on Nellis to reach Sunset and to access Sunset and Stephanie and the Sunset Station area.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. Don, if you have any specific questions as a follow-up to that, please feel free to add that question in the chat. We do have another question from Don, though, very similar. Are there going to be any changes to the 117 bus?
No changes to the 117 bus.
We do have another question from Natasha. I use the transit app. How soon will that be updated with new schedule times if any changes take place to Route 122?
This will actually be updated on the day of the service change, which is scheduled right now tentatively for October 4th.
And just going back to an original question that Diane had for us about Astrid, I believe, Jacob, you answered it, but if you don't mind just going back to it, the name of the street is Astrid, and it's off Owens past Cimarron. So would you be able to provide some better information as far as how we would get to work and home from Owens past Cimarron?
Jacob Simmons.
Yes, sure. I actually had to double check my cross streets myself. But yes, so it's actually in the Vegas Drive in Cimarron area, located between Cimarron and Durango off of Vegas Drive. So from that location, the options remain pretty much the same, either walking along Durango or Cimarron to Washington to access Route 208, or as another option that would be a similar walk but maybe a more convenient route. The customer could also choose to walk north along Pueblo Vista to Lake Mead and access Route 210. Whether going south to Washington or north to Lake Mead, from the corner of Vegas Drive and Asteroid, it is a little over a half-mile walk from that exact location, following the walking path of the streets.
Thanks, Jacob. Diane, if you have additional questions, feel free to submit them in the chat in case that didn't answer your specific question on that route from Jacob. We do have another question. Are some of the projects that are postponed or canceled include better bus stops?
So I'm assuming the question is for the transit shelters. So we are always improving and keeping improving the transit shelters and the safety of our transit shelters. We did have funding prior to COVID where we're actually retrofitting lighting at all of our bus stops. This project was paid pre-COVID by federal money and will still continue, as well as getting brand new shelters that we got before COVID. Those will also be installed.
We have gotten a couple of comments earlier in the chat on YouTube about how participants are being invited to the meetings or how they're being notified of the public notices of the public meetings themselves. There has been some response submitted directly via YouTube, but just as a reminder, this is just the first of 4 public meetings that will be taking place. One of which is going to be in person, offered at the BCC at 2 separate times. And we have actually mailed different flyers and postcards to residents and businesses that are being impacted by the proposed eliminated route. Sue, is there anything else that you want to add specifically on the outreach?
And then also, I think there was a question about how else are people getting involved in this? And these public meetings are just a small piece of the engagement. We have heard from over 3,000 individuals through the online survey. There was a question about, individuals who might not be online, and we did do mailers in some of those areas.
Postcards.
Yes, yeah, postcards where we knew it was highly, senior citizens or other folks who may not have access to the internet. So we did provide it that way. We're actually going back out now with in-person surveys in some of those areas where facilities will let us in and provide that in person. So there are still ongoing efforts, and this comment period stays open through the end of August. So we are continuing to push and gather as much information as we can.
Thanks, Sue. We have one more question from YouTube from Catherine. She is asking, the 208 eastbound at Pkwy hasn't had a bench for 4 years. Will that be fixed?
We'll take a note of that question, and we'll have our transit amenity teams look at it. So we'll just take a little pause, wait for it to get more questions, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back for questions.
So we have another question from Natasha regarding the Silver Star. Could you explain what that is again? Google tells me it's a service for seniors that's open to everyone. What does it look like? Is that a sort of bus-like paratransit?
Good evening, Natasha. So it is a bus that is similar to paratransit, but it's open actually to all the public, not only to seniors. And as I was mentioning in the presentation, this route will actually be customized to service apartment complexes, grocery stores, pharmacies, doctor's office. So this is a route. You can see it. I don't know if you can see the screen on the 207. I just put one. It's the blue. It's the current blue line, but this route will actually be customized with all the input that we're getting during the comment period this summer to make sure that we're covering as much of our customers as possible. And if ever you were wondering for the 209, I just put it back on the screen. And if you see that blue line, well, once again, this will be most likely heavily modified once we get all the comments and the needs from those routes.
And then just a note that Catherine did update its route 201 rather than the 208. And Catherine, we got that note, and we'll get back to you. We'll get to our team and get back to you with information on that.
Yes.
On that bus stop.
We have one question from Facebook from Desmond. The question is specifically for Route 210. The question reads, any chance that the 210 Lake Mead route will take a horseshoe round between Eastern and Las Vegas Boulevard?
At this moment, we're not planning any modification to the 210. In the future, Jacob, do you want to speak to that question for the future?
Monica, can you repeat for me one more time just the key word there? I thought I heard horseshoe.
Horseshoe, yes. Any chance that the 210 Lake Mead route will take a horseshoe round between Eastern and Las Vegas Boulevard?
So obviously we know, Jacob, that the answer is no for now, but I don't think it is, but I was just wondering in the future planning of that route if it's something you have ever considered.
I don't think I understand the terminology, but we...
It's a turnaround, Jacob.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize. In that case, no, we have not looked at any sort of mid-route modifications or turnaround to the 210 in that area.
Thank you.
No additional questions.
Okay, we'll pause again for a little while until questions are coming in. We're just, good evening, we're back. We're just noticing a bit, some more participants to the YouTube Live. So we will actually at 6 o'clock, we'll answer questions until 6 o'clock, and at 6 o'clock, we'll restart the presentations for our new viewers. Thank you. Good evening again. Just as a reminder, we will restart the presentation at 6 o'clock for those who just attended the YouTube Live. And we're still waiting for questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat box on YouTube. Okay, we have another question. We'll answer that question and then we'll restart the presentation. So Monica, what's the question?
We actually have two. The
Oh.
first one is, if the state decides to close in a week or two again, will the fair be free again?
So obviously, we're monitoring the situation on a day-to-day basis, but the closing the front door boarding and the fare collection is really unlikely. We've equipped our driver with new driver enclosure doors, and as I mentioned in the presentation, 33% of our funding is coming from fare box revenue.
Thank you. And then the second question, are masks mandatory on the bus?
Masks are definitely mandatory on vehicles, just like the governor, the governor mandate. Public transit is a public area, and masks are mandated. Okay, with that, Sue, should we start the presentation?
Yeah, let's begin again. So good evening, everyone who's new to the call. We are going to do a second presentation and then open up for questions. So this is the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada's public meeting for proposed transit service changes. This is the first of 4 public meetings that will be held over the next week. I'm Sue with Outreach and Media at the RTC. So before we begin this next presentation, I would like to review just a few housekeeping items for those who are new to the call. To allow for public participation, the RTC is accepting public comments via email at getconnected@rtcsnv.com. Comments can also be submitted right to the YouTube live chat where you're watching right now. We'll provide several breaks in the presentation to address questions as we go, and we will hold a final question and answer session at the conclusion of the presentation. If we do happen to have additional questions beyond the 2-hour meeting time, we will provide answers via email, and all questions and answers from this online session will be posted on rtcsnv.com by early next week. I'll turn the time back over to Francis Julian, Deputy CEO of the RTC, for the presentation.
Good evening again. As we all know and have experienced, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted the global economy, our transportation infrastructure system, and has changed life as we know it. At the RTC, similar to other agencies, we have taken several actions to mitigate the financial impact of COVID-19. Prior to COVID-19, our transit service was already facing significant financial strain. Our previous revenue and expense projections showed a $6 million shortfall in our transit fund for fiscal year 2020. Fiscal year 2020 for the RTC just ended last month. And future projections showed that the shortfall could be as high as $20 million per year. With the impact of severe revenue decline due to COVID-19, the RTC Transit Fund is estimated to have a $24 million shortfall for the fiscal year we just ended, so 2020, and a $102 million shortfall in fiscal year 2021, which we just started. To adjust for the budget deficit internally, we cut nearly $40 million from our budget. And we're now facing, as you can see, a $63 million deficit. How did we accomplish those cuts? We actually postponed some capital projects and eliminated some of the capital projects. We suspended and cut some contracts. We implemented a hiring freeze. We cut management pay up to 5%. We negotiated a new collective bargaining agreement with all our employees to have salary reductions. We laid off or furloughed nearly 15% of our workforce. And as we're doing tonight, we're actually proposing significant reduction to our transit system. So as I mentioned earlier, the fiscal year that just ended last month, we are facing now a $24 million deficit, a $63 million deficit after all the cuts we've made for next year. But the years coming along, we're actually still looking at $50, $52, and $62 million. Fortunately, we had the CARES Act money. The CARES Act money is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. So as I mentioned, we received $102 million from the federal, and we plan on for fiscal 2020 to gap our budget shortfall of $24 million. For this fiscal year to gap our $63 million shortfall and utilize the last $24 million for fiscal year 2022. The CARES Act is a temporary solution. There is likely no additional transit funding coming from the federal government to address this crisis. As I mentioned, long-term funding for transit services will continue to be a serious challenge that we are going to have to address by fiscal year 2022. Again, we're proposing significant cuts to our transit services for this fall and may need to make additional adjustments in the future. Just as a reminder, the funding mechanism for the RTC are from both fare box revenue and sales tax revenue. A lot of our peer agencies are getting extra revenue from property tax, fuel tax, and TNC tax. Proposed service change include route elimination, route adjustments, and proposed frequency decrease. I'll turn it back over to Sue to review the outreach and engagement for these proposed changes, and after that, I'll come back to go specifically in those changes.
All right, thank you, Francis. So before we make any of the final decisions on the proposed changes, we need to hear from our community. So we are in the middle of a 60-day comment period right now that began on June 29th and will run through August 28th. So we're asking individuals to visit rtcsnv.com and review the detailed changes, provide feedback via a brief survey. And of course, this meeting tonight is just one piece of the engagement puzzle that we are putting together over the next 60 days. So far, from our efforts, we've received more than 3,000 responses to the survey. So we're receiving input and comments, and we really appreciate that. So the goal of our outreach, the objective really, is to share with the community, educate on what the proposed changes are and why we're making those. Second is to listen, to get feedback, gather input, and see how these impacts affect our riders. And then finally, to learn from those, to analyze the data, and possibly make some adjustments if appropriate. So our goal is to reach out to all of our customers, those that are riding now and those that may not be riding, and then to the general public, and then to hear back from as many people as we can. Our goal really is to hear from anyone who will provide feedback. So system-wide, we know that even if you're not on a specifically impacted route, that these may impact you. So we are engaging with our community in several different ways. We have been briefing our elected officials and reaching out to them. They in turn have been sharing information with their constituents across the valley. We've done a limited number of in-person community engagements due to COVID-19, but at our transit centers, we have been meeting with people in person. We have been doing some public relations with our media partners, TV, radio, social media. They're helping to push the information out for us. And marketing specifically to our transit customers, including signage on board our vehicles, at our transit centers, bus stops, on our transit Wi-Fi. We've pushed out emails, social media, rider alerts, and social media. So in addition to the general outreach that we've done, we're also doing some very specific engagement along the most impacted routes that we're looking at. We've done targeted community engagement with senior communities, specifically in those areas where there is a high senior population and at some of our busiest transit locations along specific routes. We've also done targeted social media advertising, focusing again on those specific routes, and then targeted marketing, including postcards, door hangers, and flyer distribution along those specific routes. So I'm going to turn the time back over to Francis, and he'll go through the details of the proposed service changes.
Thank you, Sue. There are three areas of proposed changes that we'll be reviewing with you tonight. First, those routes proposed for elimination. Second, those routes proposed for routing adjustments. And third, one route that is proposed for a frequency decrease. So let's start with the routes that we're proposing to eliminate. The first one is Route 207. Route 207 will be discontinued and be replaced with a Silver Star route that will run 3 to 4 days a week. Just to explain what a Silver Star route is, it's a route that is flexible, that actually services the main apartment complex, grocery stores, pharmacies, and doctors' offices. RTC primarily operates bus routes on major streets that are 1 mile apart throughout much of the Las Vegas Valley. Route 207 is an exception, running entirely on streets that are half a mile from larger, busier streets and transit services, namely Charleston and Bonanza. Alternative routes are available nearby for a vast majority of customers. 98.8% of residents and 99.8% of jobs within half a mile of Route 207s are also half a mile from other routes. The top 20 busiest stops along the routes all have other bus routes available at the same intersection or within a quarter mile or less. Route 209, we are also proposing to discontinue. This is the Vegas and Owens route. That route will also be replaced with a Silver Star route that will run 3 to 4 days a week. Once again, RTC primarily operates bus routes on major streets that are 1 mile apart throughout much of the Las Vegas Valley. Route 209 is an exception, running entirely on streets that are half a mile from larger, busier streets and transit services. In that case, namely Lake Mead Boulevard and Washington Avenue. Alternative routes are available nearby for a vast majority of customers. 99.6% of residents and 99.9% of jobs are within half a mile of this route, are also within half a mile of another route. The Strip and Downtown Express and the Deuce on the Strip. The Strip and Downtown Express and the Deuce routes are a combination of one route elimination and a route adjustment. So we will discontinue the SDX and the Strip and Downtown Express. We will increase the Deuce service to 24 hours and increase frequency on the route, on this route. Ridership on the SDX has declined by over a third over the past 4 years, and decreases are likely to accelerate further in the post-COVID-19 new normal. The SDX is redundant. Almost all stops serving 97% of the SDX customers will be serviced by the Deuce or other routes. The SDX is fuel inefficient vehicle are high, and the high fare evasion that we were experiencing because it's an all-door boarding route makes it the RTC most expensive route per bus per hour to operate. Relocating main public transit stops from the Las Vegas Convention Center to the Las Vegas Boulevard aligns well with the new Convention Center expansion and the new underground people mover system that will break ground in the upcoming months. We will also be introducing a new downtown shuttle to connect the Las Vegas premium outlet malls to the Deuce. The WAX and CX routes, so the Westcliff Airport Express and the Centennial Express, are a combination of one route elimination and a routing adjustment. Noteworthy changes to the CX and the WAX would not affect or reduce the paratransit service area, but may include eliminate the WAX, Westcliff Transit Center to McCarran International Airport, and modify the CX to replace a lower ridership path for the CX between the downtown Las Vegas and UNLV with a higher ridership routing used by the Westcliff Airport Express in this area, creating a new, more efficient CX that serves the most popular destinations on both routes. The CX would no longer service the Spring Mountain at Las Vegas Boulevard, Howard Hughes Parkway, or Flamingo in Maryland, but instead would now service Tropicana at Las Vegas Boulevard and McCarran Airport at Terminal 1, in addition to the current Terminal 3 service that it already provides. Express service to and from Centennial Hill and downtown Las Vegas, UNLV and McCarran Airport would not be affected. Monica, for those first section of routes, do we have any questions?
Not specifically on those.
Okay, so we'll take the questions afterwards. Next are the proposed routing adjustments. So the first route is the Valley View and Arville, the 104. With Route 104 specifically, modifications are being proposed to the route on Valley View between Russell and Twain. Route 104 is primarily intended to serve Valley View, but it had always operated along Arville from Russell to Twain because Valley View did not connect between Flamingo and Tropicana. A major new bridge over the railroad track is opening this summer that will change that. So the RTC is proposing for Route 104 to remain on Valley View between Russell and Twain to eliminate the need to deviate to Arville and have a more natural path staying on Valley View. The Henderson and Downtown Express will be shortened to run only between Water Street and Boulder City. It will no longer run to downtown Las Vegas. The route will stay on I-11 bypassing Nevada State College, and Nevada State College will be serviced by the Boulder Highway Express. The Sahara Express. Restructure and shorten the Sahara Express SX A and B line. Modifications are being proposed to the route on the east side of the valley, specifically east of Sarah and Lamb, where the SX branches off. With the SXA service along Nellis and Lake Mead would be eliminated. SXA would instead stay on Sahara and go to Hollywood and would end at Hollywood and Vegas Valley. It's worth noting that the part of the route that would be eliminated would be serviced by other routes. The SXB would be slightly shorter, ending at Cabana and Desert Inn. And lastly, we'll go over the proposed frequency decrease on Route 122. Route 122 is Maryland Parkway and Horizon Ridge in Henderson. Route frequency will be reduced from every 30 minutes during weekdays to every 50 minutes. 60 minutes weekend frequency will still remain. We have 3 more public meetings after tonight where the community can engage with us virtually on YouTube Live or in person at our Bonneville Transit Center. For our virtual public meeting, participants can go to the RTC's YouTube page and submit comments and questions. Wednesday, July 29, from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. For our in-person public meetings, we will hold them at the BTC, the Bonneville Transit Center, in the morning and early evening on Wednesday, August 5th. The hours will be from 7 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock in the morning, and then from 5 to 7 p.m. at night. What is our timeline? So we've started the public outreach. As Sue mentioned, over 3,000 surveys and outreach were already done. It started on June 29. It will end on August 28. All digital engagement, social media, PR, and in-person engagement launch first day of the comment period. On September 10th, we'll actually go and seek approval from our RTC board. And potential service change will begin on October 4th, 2020. This concludes our presentation, and we're available to take any question you may have. Monica, do we have any questions?
We do have a question that was submitted via email. The comment in question reads, I would like to see more participation from the public. Perhaps the RTC could consider making phone calls to customers. Many customers are seniors who don't use computers. I would think we can work more collaboratively and more creative. Many families are struggling. This is something that they shouldn't have to be concerned about. Really, can these changes be possibly entertaining when things get better for families?
So as part of the outreach, to answer the question, as part of the outreach, we actually have postcard mailers specifically for those reasons along the affected route. And so far, as I mentioned, we received over 3,000 comments. So each of those routes, we're actually sending paper information. We actually have email blasts we're sending to our current database of riders. There's questions on the Wi-Fi on our vehicle. And Sue, am I forgetting some initiatives?
We've also included flyers. Businesses along those routes are posting flyers all over our vehicles. So anybody actually getting on the bus that may not have received an email, they're getting rider alerts and a full tear sheet that includes every detail of the service change and how to provide comment. Signage at our transit centers, And actually at our bus stops.
And the media, all the media coverage.
Yeah, yeah.
That we have. Okay.
Do you want to address the latter part of the question about waiting to make these changes when families feel more comfortable or when we're past COVID-19?
So because of the financial situation the RTC is in, as we've mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, time is of the essence. We cannot afford to wait, and that's why we are actually going above and beyond on all the outreaches and the ways we're trying to reach our customers, whether it's virtually, by mailers, by paper surveys, by online surveys, with the media, to make sure that we have as many comments as possible.
Thanks. We do not have any additional questions.
Okay, so we'll wait a bit for more questions. Welcome back. We just had some questions that we'll answer. So Monica, if you could please read them.
Yes. First question we have from Gilbert. Great question. What's going to happen to the streetcar buses that are being used for the SDX? Are they just going to go away like the MAX bus?
So the streetcar vehicle that were on the SDX will actually go away with the federal mandate. They're scheduled to go away at the end of our fiscal year this year. So we will still be utilizing them on the shuttle, on the downtown shuttle we were talking about, that bridges the Las Vegas Premium Outlet Mall to the Deuce. But as I mentioned, these are the most expensive vehicles to operate for the RTC, and their useful life is coming to an end.
Thank you. The next question, will paratransit be affected by the recent changes? If so, how?
So paratransit will have a small section in Henderson. It's exactly 0.3 square mile where paratransit will be affected, but all current paratransit customers will be grandfathered in the system, so nobody's affected.
We have another question from Catherine. The question reads, do you have any numbers about how many kids use RTC for school instead of the school bus? My mom wouldn't take the Bonanza bus right after school because it was full of rowdy, unruly teens.
So we do not have specific numbers. We do have some pilot programs that we're running with CCSD, but not in that area. But we do not have any stats on how many students from different schools, because they do have the option of taking either public transit at a certain age or their school buses.
No additional questions at this time.
Okay, no questions, so we'll mute ourselves and come back as soon as we get the next questions. Okay, we received some questions by email and from the YouTube Live.
First question from YouTube Live from Don. Are there any changes to the 212 West from SSCT towards the VA?
No changes at all.
And then we have a follow-up question that was submitted via email. To reiterate, during these difficult times, families are trying to make ends meet. Do you realize that potentially this may be the only way that families can get to work? Again, I have to ask if the RTC would consider waiting to discuss these cuts when things are better for families.
We would love to wait for things to get better. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in the first answer, with our financial situation, we just cannot. The situation is dire, and we're trying to do the least amount of cuts as possible. And the longer we wait, the more cuts we'll have to make. That being said, the reasoning behind the routes that we're either cutting or changing is not to change the footprint of the current transit system and to give all our riders an alternative to what they have right now. So some of the routes where riders will be impacted, they will have to maybe walk a quarter mile or half a mile more to get to transit system, which will bring them on par with other routes. And in other sections, we're asking some of our customers to make a transfer. But at no point are we cutting any of the connectivities or the scope of our transit system.
We have some additional questions that came in via YouTube. Another one from John. Are there going to be any changes to the buses on Boulder Highway?
Well, depending on what, if you're asking if it's still going to be double-decker, a combination of double-deckers or 60-footers, that should remain exactly the same. The double-deckers, as the years are going by, will eventually fade away, but you will still see a couple of double-deckers in the upcoming year.
We have another question from Ann on YouTube. It's actually more of a comment, but I'll pose it as a question. I catch the SXA at Nellis and Lake Mead to get to my doctor's offices. Now you're stopping that, so I have no way to get to my doctor's. I'm ad-libbing this part. Is there going to be an additional or a new route for Ann to get to her doctor?
I'll let Jacob answer the question, but there is a really simple transfer to do. But Jacob, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it would depend on the specific origin and destination of the customer that's currently using the SXA. But yes, as Francis mentioned, all stops in all areas of the SXA are being served by other routes, in this case, Route 210 on Lake Mead and Route 115 on Nellis Boulevard. So if we had specific origin and destination, we can give the precise routing, but certainly that trip would still be possible on transit, just involving a transfer.
I do not see any additional questions.
Okay, so we're not seeing any question. We'll take a small pause of 5 minutes and be right back. Okay, we're back. We have a couple of questions, so let's go ahead and see what we got.
Yeah, Anne wants to know, why aren't your drivers enforcing wearing masks?
Very good question, Anne. The safety of, actually the drivers are contractors and police, but their safety is still paramount for us. Bus drivers have really a hard job. Our goal is to make sure that their safety is being maintained. We want to make sure we're avoiding any kind of altercation in between the drivers and passengers. For this reason, the security officers are actually mandated to enforce the mask wearing, and that's why the information is broadcasted on our header sign. There's announcements now inside the vehicle, and we have big signs inside the vehicle as well.
Thank you. Another question we have from YouTube Live. Why don't your drivers wait for people to sit down before leaving the stop?
This is a very good question. Each time it happens, I would strongly encourage you to call customer service and to make a complaint. The operational procedures for a bus driver is to wait for people to be seated or securing themselves to a handrail before moving the vehicle.
And no additional questions.
Okay, we'll take another 5-minute break until we get questions, and we'll be right back. Good evening. We're back with what looks like our last question. So if there's any more questions, please just send them right now. We're almost out of time. So Monica, what's your question?
We do have one question from Anne about submitting complaints for drivers via customer service. It sounds like she's had some bad experiences trying to connect with us. So she's asking, how can people submit, excuse me, how can people submit comments about the drivers?
So there's different ways to submit comments. You can do it online, by email, on social media, actually even on our app, and obviously by telephone to the customer service. We'll send with your response, we'll send you the email address. Or Monica, would you like to share, or you'll just send them over?
Yes, so if you would like to submit any complaints, you can visit our website at rtcsnv.com, or you can email us directly at getconnected@rtcsnv.com.
Good. Thank you. And with that, not seeing any other questions, I would just like to take the last moment for our audience. Please make sure you go and fill out the survey. It's really useful information, and we want to hear your voice. We want to hear what you have to say, to see what kind of modifications we could actually bring potentially to our plan. So with that, I want to thank Sue, Monica, Jesse, Jacob, and Cindy that were on the line, and have a good night and stay healthy. Thank you.